Tonight, we're diving into 3 hours of gripping true crime cases. Real stories of mystery, betrayal, and cold-blooded crimes, all set against the soothing backdrop of rain. It's the perfect blend of calm and unsettling. If these cases draw you in, tap that like button, share with your fellow true crime lovers, and subscribe to join our curious community. I'm always wondering, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. Now settle in, and let's dig into the darkness. Story 1. The small town of Martinsville, Illinois, in the autumn of 2014, was a place where time seemed to move slowly. Cornfields stretched toward the horizon, their golden stalks swaying under a wide, gray sky. The streets were quiet, lined with modest homes and local businesses, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and doors were often left unlocked. It was here, in this unassuming corner of the Midwest, that Kaylin Whitaker, a 20-year-old woman with a bright spirit and a heart full of dreams, lived her final days. Her life, filled with the promise of youth, was cut short on Halloween night, in a tragedy that would haunt her family and community for years to come. Kaylin was a daughter, a sister, a fiancée, a young woman whose warmth and creativity touched everyone around her. She was studying at a local college, her days filled with classes, part-time work, and plans for a future with her fiancé, Connor Scott. Her mother, Leslie Roberts, was a woman of quiet strength, a mother who cherished her daughter's laughter and fierce independence. Her father, Dave Whitaker, was a steady presence, a man who worked hard to provide for his family. Kaylin's older brothers, Caleb and Jacob, were her protectors, her confidants, always ready to share a joke or a memory. Together, they were a family bound by love, their home a place of warmth and shared meals, where Kaylin's artwork, delicate sketches and a sculpted porcelain heart with wings, adorned the walls. But beneath the surface of Kaylin's life, there was a shadow. Connor Scott, the man she loved, was not what he seemed. At 24, he was charming but controlling, his affection laced with a possessiveness that grew more oppressive with time. Their relationship, which began in the hopeful days of high school, had become a source of tension, a delicate balance of love and fear. On October 31st, 2014, that balance would tip, and a single gunshot would shatter the quiet of Martinsville, leaving a family broken and a community searching for answers. The story of Kaylin Whitaker's murder is one of deception, loss, and a relentless pursuit of justice. It is a tale of a young woman whose light was extinguished too soon, of a family's unwavering fight for truth, and of a man whose confession would unravel a lie that had lingered for years. This is the story of Kaylin, of Connor Scott, and of a crime that would test the resilience of those who loved her. Kaylin Whitaker's life was a tapestry of small joys and big dreams. She lived with Connor in the basement apartment of his parents' home in Martinsville, a rural town where the rhythm of life was set by the seasons. The apartment was modest, its walls thin, the air often heavy with the smell of damp earth. But Kaylin made it her own, filling the space with her artwork, sketches of landscapes, abstract designs, and a porcelain heart she called Wings of Love, a symbol of her belief in freedom and beauty. She was a student at a nearby college, studying art and design, her notebooks filled with ideas for paintings and sculptures. Her part-time job at a department store kept her busy, but she always found time for her family and friends, her laughter a constant in their lives. Kaylin was the kind of person who lived fully in each moment. She loved Halloween, the way it brought out the playful side of the world, and she had plans to attend a party that night with friends. She texted her best friend, Sarah, about her costume, a witch complete with a pointy hat she'd found at a thrift store. "It's gonna be epic," she wrote, her words bubbling with excitement. Sarah, who had known Kaylin since their school days, loved her friend's enthusiasm, her ability to make even the simplest plans feel special. But Sarah had noticed a change in Kaylin over the past year. Her smile, once so effortless, was sometimes strained, her eyes carrying a quiet worry she didn't voice. That worry stemmed from her relationship with Connor Scott. They had met in high school, introduced by a mutual friend during Kaylin's senior year. Connor, with his easy smile and quiet confidence, had seemed like a good match for Kaylin's vibrant spirit. They dated for 9 months, a whirlwind of teenage romance that ended when Kaylin, feeling suffocated by Connor's need to know her every move, broke things off. She met someone else while working at the department store, a brief fling that gave her a taste of freedom. But Connor came back into her life, promising change, and Kaylin, with her forgiving heart, gave him another chance. By 2014, they were engaged, living together in the basement apartment, planning a future that seemed just within reach. Leslie, Kaylin's mother, had reservations about the engagement. She saw the way Connor's demeanor shifted, his charm giving way to control. He didn't like Kaylin spending time with her friends, insisting she check in with him constantly. He'd call her when she was out, asking where she was, who she was with. Leslie would later recall, her voice heavy with regret. She'd laugh it off, say he just cared too much. But Kaylin's laughter grew less frequent, her spirit dimming under the weight of Connor's demands. She confided in her mother about arguments, about feeling trapped, but her love for Connor, and her belief that he could change, kept her tethered to him. On the morning of October 31st, 2014, Kaylin woke early, her mind on the Halloween party. She spent the day at the department store, chatting with co-workers, her witch costume tucked into her bag. She texted Sarah, promising to meet her later, her messages full of her usual warmth. But as the day wore on, Connor's messages came in a flurry, each one more insistent than the last. He wanted to know her plans, who she'd be with when she'd be home. Kaylin, frustrated but determined not to let it ruin her night, told him she'd see him after the party. She didn't know that her decision to go out would ignite a rage that had been smoldering for months. That night, around midnight, the quiet of Martinsville was shattered by a 911 call. Connor's voice, trembling with panic, filled the line. "She shot herself," he said, his words rushed and breathless. "I woke up to a gunshot, and she's gone." The dispatcher, a seasoned operator named Linda, kept her voice calm, guiding Connor through the moments that followed. Police and paramedics raced to the rural home on the outskirts of town, their sirens cutting through the Halloween night. When they arrived, they found Kaylin in the basement apartment, lying in bed, a .45 Glock pistol on the floor beside her. Her face was still, her eyes closed, a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. The scene was chaotic, holes punched in the drywall, the air heavy with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Illinois State Police Special Agent Holly Finney was among the first on the scene. A veteran investigator with a sharp eye, she took in the details: Kaylin's body, partially covered by a blanket, the gun on the floor, the fresh damage to the walls. Something didn't feel right. Connor, sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, told a story of waking to the sound of a gunshot, finding Kaylin dead, and pushing the gun away in shock. He insisted she had been struggling, that she must have taken her own life. But Finney's instincts told her otherwise. Kaylin was right-handed, yet the bullet had entered the left side of her head, an unusual angle for a self-inflicted wound. There was no soot or stippling around the wound, signs that would be present if the gun had been fired at close range. And the blood, small specks on Kaylin's right palm, none on the gun, and some on her arm beneath the blanket, didn't align with Connor's story. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Roland Kaur, arrived to examine the scene. He was a meticulous man, his years of experience teaching him to trust the evidence over emotion. As he studied Kaylin's body, he noted the inconsistencies: the angle of the wound, the lack of gunpowder residue, the blood patterns that suggested movement after the shot. He listed her manner of death as undetermined, pending further investigation, but his gut told him this was no suicide. The police interviewed Connor that day, his story consistent but his demeanor uneasy, his eyes darting as he spoke. He claimed he and Kaylin had been playing video games late into the night, falling asleep together, only for him to wake to tragedy. But the holes in the wall, the physical evidence, and Kaylin's lack of known mental health struggles raised doubts. Kaylin's family was devastated. Leslie and Dave were at home in Terre Haute, Indiana, when police arrived to deliver the news. Leslie collapsed, her cries echoing through the house as Dave held her, his own grief silent but profound. Caleb and Jacob, summoned from their own lives, joined their parents, their shock giving way to disbelief. "Kaylin would never do that," Dave said, his voice firm despite his tears. "She loved life. She had plans." Leslie, clutching a photo of her daughter smiling at a family barbecue, agreed. "She was happy, she was strong. This doesn't make sense." Their suspicions fell on Connor, whose controlling behavior they had witnessed, whose story they couldn't believe. The investigation stretched on, the initial ruling of undetermined, death leaving Kaylin's family in limbo. Leslie and Dave pushed for answers, their grief fueling a determination to uncover the truth. They spoke to investigators, sharing stories of Connor's possessiveness, of Kaylin's growing unease. Friends confirmed their concerns, describing how Connor would text Kaylin incessantly, demanding to know her whereabouts, even when she was with them. Sarah recalled a night when Kaylin had shown her a string of messages from Connor, each one more accusatory than the last. "He didn't want her to have a life outside of him," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "She was trying to be herself, but he wouldn't let her." 10 months later, in August 2015, Dr. Kaur received the ballistics report. The tests, conducted on the .45 Glock found at the scene, confirmed what he had suspected. The gun had not been fired at close range, and the angle of the shot made it physically impossible for Kaylin to have pulled the trigger herself. Kaur amended his ruling, declaring Kaylin's death a homicide. The news was a bittersweet relief for her family, a validation of their belief that she hadn't taken her own life, but it came with a new weight. Someone had killed her, and that someone was still free. The Clark County State's Attorney's Office took up the case, but progress was slow. Connor, the obvious suspect, maintained his innocence, refusing to speak further with police. The evidence, ballistics, blood patterns, the holes in the wall, was compelling, but not enough for an immediate arrest. The case stalled, leaving Leslie and Dave frustrated and heartbroken. They turned to the media in 2018, sharing their story with local outlets like MyWabashValley.com, their voices raw with anger and grief. "This is a homicide case. It has been since 2015, and nothing's being done about it," Dave told a reporter, his hands clenched into fists. "We deserve closure. We deserve peace." The media attention put pressure on Connor, who had moved to Danville, Indiana, about 6 months earlier. He was living a quiet life, working odd jobs, but his past was catching up with him. In February 2019, just weeks after a disturbing incident where he threatened suicide during an argument with his new girlfriend, Connor walked into the Danville Metropolitan Police Department. It was a Sunday night, the station quiet, the officer at the desk startled by the young man's sudden appearance. "I need to talk to someone," Connor said, his voice low but steady. "I killed Kaylin Whitaker back in 2014. I think it was on Halloween." The confession stunned the police. They sat Connor down, recording his statement as he recounted the night of the murder. He admitted to using the .45 Glock, which he kept loaded under the bed, to shoot Kaylin in the back of the head. He claimed he was under the influence of meth and marijuana, his mind clouded, his reasons unclear even to himself. "I don't know why I did it," he said, his voice breaking. "I think about her every day." He described punching the holes in the wall in a fit of rage after the act, overwhelmed by what he had done. The police contacted the Illinois State Police, who sent investigators to Danville to interview him further. Connor was arrested and held at Hendricks County Jail, awaiting extradition to Illinois. Kaylin's family was notified the next day. Leslie was at home, folding laundry, when the call came from Special Agent Finney. "He confessed," Finney said, her voice gentle but firm. "We have him." Leslie sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face, a mix of relief and anguish washing over her. "Thank you, Lord, for answering our prayers," she whispered, clutching the phone. Dave, standing nearby, pulled her into his arms, his own eyes wet with tears. For 4 years, they had lived with the pain of Kaylin's loss, the frustration of a case that seemed to go nowhere. Now, at last, there was a path to justice. The trial began in September 2019 at the Clark County Courthouse in Marshall, Illinois. The courtroom was small, its wooden benches filled with reporters from People, Oxygen, and local outlets like WTHI-TV. Assistant Appellate Prosecutor Ed Parkinson led the case, his presentation meticulous and unrelenting. He laid out the evidence, the ballistics report, the blood patterns, the holes in the wall, Connor's confession. He called Dr. Kaur to the stand, who explained why the physical evidence ruled out suicide. The bullet entered the back of her head at an angle that would have been impossible for her to achieve, Kaur said, his voice steady. The lack of stippling and soot confirms the gun was fired from a distance. Leslie took the stand, her voice trembling but resolute as she spoke of her daughter. Kaylin was a radiant life, she said, her eyes fixed on the jury. She loved art, her friends, her family. She had so much to give, and he stole that from her. She described Connor's controlling behavior, the way it dimmed Kaylin's light, the fear she saw in her daughter's eyes. Sarah testified too, her words heavy with grief as she recounted Kaylin's plans for the Halloween party, her excitement for a night of freedom. The prosecution painted a picture of a young woman trapped by a man whose love had turned deadly, a man who couldn't let her go. Connor's defense team argued that his confession was coerced by guilt and substance abuse, that the killing was not premeditated but a moment of impulse. They pointed to his drug use that night, his emotional distress, his claim that he didn't know why he did it. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Connor, facing the possibility of life in prison, accepted a plea deal. On September 30th, 2019, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, receiving a sentence of 37 years with no possibility of early release, followed by 3 years of probation. The sentencing hearing was a moment of catharsis for Kaylin's family. Leslie read a victim impact statement, her voice breaking as she spoke of the loss that had shattered their lives. Not only did he steal Kaylin's tomorrows, he stole ours, she said, her words echoing in the quiet courtroom. It torments us, the question of whether she knew her life was going to end. We pray she didn't. Dave stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his silence a testament to his grief. Caleb and Jacob, in the gallery, wept quietly, their sister's memory a weight they would carry forever. The aftermath of the trial was a time of healing, though the scars would never fully fade. Leslie and Dave created a memorial for Kaylin in their backyard, a small garden where her porcelain wings of love sculpture sat, surrounded by flowers. They found solace in her artwork, framing her sketches and sharing them with friends and family. Sarah organized a community art show in Kaylin's honor, displaying her drawings and raising money for a scholarship in her name. The town of Martinsville, shaken by the tragedy, came together, their vigils a quiet tribute to a life lost too soon. Special Agent Finney, who had worked the case from the beginning, carried Kaylin's memory with her. She spoke at local events, urging communities to take signs of controlling behavior seriously, to listen to victims before it's too late. The case became a rallying point for advocates, who pushed for better protections against domestic violence and stronger action in cold cases. The Clark County State's Attorney's Office issued a statement, calling Kaylin's death a preventable tragedy, a reminder of the need for vigilance. Connor Scott faded into the confines of prison, his life a stark contrast to the freedom he once knew. His confession, though it brought justice, left questions unanswered. Why he did it, what drove him to that moment. For Kaylin's family, those questions lingered, a painful reminder of the mystery of human cruelty. But they found strength in each other, in the memories of Kaylin's laughter, her art, her love. Leslie often sat in the garden, her fingers tracing the wings of the porcelain heart, whispering to her daughter as the sun set over the cornfields. "You're still with us," she would say, her voice soft but sure. The murder of Kaylin Whitaker was a wound that would never fully heal, a loss that rippled through a family and a community. It was a story of a young woman whose light shone brightly, only to be extinguished by a man whose love turned to violence. But it was also a story of resilience, of a family's unwavering fight for justice, of a community that refused to forget. In the quiet fields of Martinsville, where the corn sways and the stars burn bright, Kaylin's spirit lingers, a reminder to cherish those we love, to fight for truth, and to hold tight to the wings of love that carry us through loss. Story 2. The snow fell relentlessly on the night of January 28, 2022, blanketing Canton, Massachusetts, in a silent, unforgiving shroud. The suburban streets, lined with neatly manicured lawns and colonial-style homes, seemed frozen in time, the kind of place where neighbors waved and tragedies felt distant. But at 34 Fairview Road, a house owned by a Boston police officer, the warmth of a late-night party was about to give way to a chilling discovery. John O'Keefe, a 46-year-old Boston police officer, known for his infectious laugh and unwavering dedication, lay motionless in a snowbank, his body battered by the cold and something far more sinister. By morning, his girlfriend, Karen Red, would be at the center of a storm that would captivate a nation, her name synonymous with a case that blurred the lines between accident, murder, and conspiracy. The Karen Reed case, as it would come to be known, was not just a story of a death in the snow. It was a tale of fractured trust, tangled relationships, and a community forced to confront the shadows within its own ranks. John O'Keefe was a man who seemed to embody the best of Boston's working-class spirit. Born and raised in the city's tight-knit neighborhoods, he joined the Boston Police Department in his 20s, rising to the rank of officer with a reputation for fairness and warmth. At 46, he was a father figure to his niece and nephew, whom he had taken in after their mother's death, and a beloved friend whose annual Christmas party was a highlight for colleagues. His life intersected with Karen Reed's in 2020, when the two met through mutual friends. Karen, then 41, was a financial analyst and adjunct professor, her sharp intellect matched by a quick wit and a penchant for lively debate. Raised in Taunton, Massachusetts, she had built a career in the corporate world, her polished demeanor a contrast to John's blue-collar roots. Their relationship, by all accounts, was passionate but stormy, marked by late-night arguments and reconciliations that left friends wondering if they were a perfect match or a powder keg waiting to ignite. On that fateful January night, John and Karen were out with friends, hopping between bars in Canton, a town 20 miles south of Boston. The evening began at the Waterfall Bar and Grill, where they laughed over drinks with a group that included Jennifer McCabe, the sister-in-law of Boston Police Officer Brian Albert, and Carrie Roberts, a close friend of Karen's. The mood was festive, the alcohol flowing freely, but undercurrents of tension simmered. John and Karen had fought earlier that day, their voices carrying through a phone call that left Karen visibly upset. As the night wore on, the group moved to C.F. McCarthy's, another local haunt, where the drinks kept coming. By midnight, Brian Albert invited everyone back to his home on Fairview Road for an after-party. John, ever the social anchor, agreed, and Karen drove them in her black Lexus SUV, the snow beginning to pile up on the roads. What happened next would become the heart of a legal battle that divided a community. According to prosecutors, Karen, intoxicated and angry after another argument with John, dropped him off at Albert's house around 12:30 a.m. In a moment of rage, they alleged, she backed her SUV into him, striking him with enough force to fracture his skull and leave him to die in the blizzard. Karen, they said, drove home, leaving John in the snow, his body discovered hours later by Karen herself, alongside Jennifer McCabe and Carrie Roberts. The scene was harrowing. John, clad in a jacket and jeans, lay unresponsive, his face bloodied, his body chilled to the bone. Paramedics rushed him to Good Samaritan Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead at 7:50 a.m. An autopsy revealed blunt force injuries to his head and hypothermia as the causes of death, though the manner, accident, homicide, or undetermined, remained unclear. Karen's version of events, however, painted a radically different picture. She insisted she had dropped John off at Albert's house and gone home to their shared residence in Mansfield, expecting him to follow after the party. When he didn't return by 4 a.m., she grew worried, her anxiety mounting as she called Jennifer McCabe, who confirmed John had never entered the house. Karen, still feeling the effects of the night's drinking, drove back to Fairview Road with Jennifer and Carrie, her heart pounding as they searched the snow-covered streets. When she spotted John's body in the snowbank, she screamed, collapsing beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to rouse him. "I didn't do this," she cried to the first responders, her voice raw with panic. Her defense team would later argue that John was not hit by her car, but was beaten inside Albert's house, possibly by partygoers, and left outside to die. A cover-up orchestrated by a tight-knit group of law enforcement officers protecting their own. The investigation began swiftly, led by Massachusetts State Trooper Michael Proctor, a seasoned officer with ties to the Canton police community. Proctor's team collected evidence from the scene: shards of a broken taillight from Karen's SUV, a single black hair on the rear bumper, and a drinking glass near John's body. To prosecutors, the evidence was damning. Karen's taillight matched fragments found near John, and her SUV's telematics data showed a brief reverse maneuver at 12:25 a.m., consistent with their theory of a fatal collision. But the defense saw something else: a rushed, biased investigation tainted by conflicts of interest. Proctor, they later revealed, had close ties to the Albert family, having attended barbecues at their home and exchanged texts with Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe. His messages, uncovered during the trial, were shocking: vulgar insults about Karen, a wish that she would kill herself, and casual discussions of the case with non-law enforcement friends. The defense argued that Proctor's bias led him to ignore evidence inside Albert's house, where no search was conducted, and to focus solely on Karen. Karen was arrested on February 1, 2022, charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating a motor vehicle under the influence, and leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death. The charges carried the weight of a life sentence, and as she was led from her home in handcuffs, her world unraveled. The news spread like wildfire, amplified by social media and local outlets like the Boston Globe. Karen, once a respected professional, became a pariah to some and a martyr to others. Supporters, dubbing themselves the Free Karen Reed movement, gathered outside the Norfolk County Superior Court in Dedham, waving signs and chanting for justice. They believed her claims of a frame-up, pointing to the cozy relationships among Canton's police and the Albert family. John's family, however, stood firmly with the prosecution, their grief raw as they mourned a man who had been their rock. "She put us through hell," John's brother Paul told NBC News, his voice heavy with anger. The first trial began on April 16, 2024, presided over by Judge Beverly Cannoni, a no-nonsense jurist known for her strict courtroom management. The Norfolk County courtroom was a crucible of emotion, packed with reporters, supporters, and the O'Keefe family, their faces etched with pain. Prosecutor Adam Lally laid out a straightforward case. Karen, intoxicated and enraged, had killed John in a moment of reckless violence. He presented the taillight fragments, the telematics data, and testimony from Jennifer McCabe, who claimed Karen had said, "I hope I didn't hit him," as they searched for John. A video from Karen's SUV, showing a small dent, was played repeatedly, the prosecution arguing it was evidence of impact. But the defense, led by attorneys Alan Jackson and David Yannetti, dismantled the narrative with surgical precision. They called Dr. Daniel Wolf and Dr. Andrew Rentschler, accident reconstruction experts, who testified that John's injuries, abrasions on his arm, a fractured skull, were inconsistent with a low-speed vehicle strike. His injuries suggest a beating, not a collision, Wolf told the jury, his voice steady. The defense's case hinged on a conspiracy theory that captivated the public. They alleged that John had entered Albert's house, where a fight broke out, possibly involving a dog bite from the Albert's German shepherd, Chloe. They pointed to Jennifer McCabe's phone, which showed a Google search at 2:27 a.m. for "How long to die in cold," hours before John's body was found, a search prosecutors claimed occurred later, after the discovery. The defense also highlighted Proctor's misconduct, his texts painting a picture of a biased investigator protecting his friends. "No one looked inside the house because a cop lived there," Jackson told the jury, his voice rising with indignation. The trial, spanning 8 weeks, was a media circus, covered by ABC's 2020 and Court TV. Jurors, a mix of local residents, grappled with conflicting evidence. The prosecution's physical evidence versus the defense's claims of a cover-up. On July 1st, 2024, after days of deliberation, they informed Judge Cannoni they were deadlocked. A mistrial was declared, leaving both sides stunned and the truth elusive. The mistrial only deepened the divide. Karen's supporters, now thousands strong, rallied outside the courthouse, their pink shirts emblazoned with justice for John and Karen. They saw her as a victim of a corrupt system, their posts on X amplifying conspiracy theories about police misconduct. John's family, meanwhile, felt cheated, their grief compounded by the lack of closure. John deserved better, his niece told reporters, her voice breaking. The prosecution, led by Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan for the retrial, doubled down, securing $1 million in state funding to bolster their case, as reported by The Independent. Karen's defense, already $5 million in debt, fought back with new motions, demanding access to Proctor's internal affairs investigation and chain of custody logs for evidence they claimed was mishandled. The retrial began on April 1, 2025, with jury selection overshadowed by Proctor's absence. Fired in March 2025 for his derogatory texts and sharing confidential details, as detailed by NBC News, Proctor was a liability for the prosecution. Brennan relied on other investigators, but the defense made Proctor's misconduct a centerpiece, arguing it tainted the entire case. The courtroom was electric, the stakes higher than ever. Karen, now 45, sat composed but pale, her eyes scanning the jury as testimony unfolded. The prosecution reiterated their narrative. Karen's SUV, her intoxication, the taillight fragments. But the defense countered with new witnesses, including a forensic pathologist who testified that John's arm injuries resembled dog bites, not vehicle impact. They also introduced a video from the Canton Police Department, allegedly showing officers joking about the case, further eroding trust in the investigation. As the trial stretched into June, the jury faced immense pressure. They asked 4 questions during deliberations, including whether a split verdict on the charges constituted a hung jury. Judge Cannoni, her patience tested, instructed them to continue, but a bizarre moment occurred on June 18, 2025, when the jury briefly announced a verdict during a lunch break, only to retract it, as reported by ABC News. 30 minutes later, they returned with their final decision: not guilty on second-degree murder, manslaughter, and leaving the scene, but guilty of operating under the influence. The courtroom erupted. Karen wept, embracing her attorney Alan Jackson, while her supporters outside cheered, their voices echoing through Dedham. John's family sat in stunned silence, their faces ashen. Judge Cannoni sentenced Karen to 1 year of probation for the OUI charge, a standard penalty for a first-time offense. The verdict, covered by outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian, was a blow to the prosecution. Criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis told Newsweek it was a black eye for the government, citing the sloppy investigation and Proctor's misconduct. The O'Keefe family, in a statement to ABC News, called it a miscarriage of justice, mourning the loss of accountability for John's death. Karen, speaking outside the courthouse, thanked her supporters and insisted she had fought for John's justice. "No one loved him more than I did," she said, her voice steady but emotional. The defense's conspiracy theory, while unproven, had sown enough doubt to sway the jury, leaving questions about what truly happened that snowy night. The aftermath was a fractured landscape. Karen, now free but forever marked by the case, returned to Mansfield, her life altered by years of legal battles. Her supporters continued to rally, their ex-posts demanding a federal investigation into the Canton police. John's family, grappling with their loss, faced the painful reality that no one might ever be held accountable for his death. "We may never know what happened," attorney Sam Bassett told Newsweek, pointing to the mishandled crime scene and the snowstorm's impact on evidence. The case, featured in a 2020 special titled Karen Reed, The Verdict, became a touchstone for debates about police accountability and the power of public opinion. In Canton, The house on Fairview Road stood quiet, its windows dark, a silent reminder of a night that changed everything. The Karen Reed case, with its unanswered questions and divided loyalties, lingered like the snow that had fallen that winter, covering truths that might never see the light. Story 3. The morning of November 13th, 2022, broke cold and gray over Moscow, Idaho, a small college town nestled in the rolling hills of the Palouse. The air carried the crisp bite of late autumn, and the streets were quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. In a modest off-campus house on King Road, for young lives were about to be shattered in a way that would ripple through the community, the nation, and beyond. This was the home of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernadle, and Ethan Chapin, University of Idaho students whose futures were bright with promise. By the time the sun rose, their home would become a crime scene, and the name Kira Sredger would soon be whispered in connection to a case that would grip the world with its horror and mystery. The house on King Road was typical of student rentals, a two-story structure with peeling paint, a cluttered front yard, and a revolving door of laughter, late-night study sessions, and weekend parties. Kaylee, a 21-year-old senior, was known for her vibrant energy and infectious smile. She was weeks away from graduating with a degree in marketing and had already lined up a job in Texas. Madison, also 21, was her best friend since childhood, a warm and grounded presence who worked at a local restaurant and dreamed of opening her own business someday. Xana, a 20-year-old junior, was the heart of any room she entered, her kindness matched only by her determination. Ethan, also 20, was Xana's boyfriend, a freshman with a quiet charm and a passion for sports. The four shared a bond forged in the carefree chaos of college life, their days filled with classes, part-time jobs, and the kind of friendships that feel eternal. That night, the house had been alive with activity. Kaylee and Madison had spent the evening downtown at the Corner Club, a popular bar where students gathered to unwind. They laughed over drinks, shared stories, and ordered food from a local food truck before heading home around 1:45 a.m. Xana and Ethan, meanwhile, had attended a party at a nearby fraternity house, returning to King Road shortly after 1:30 a.m. Two other roommates, Bethany Funk and Dylan Mortensen, were also home that night, tucked away in their rooms on the first floor. The house settled into silence, the kind of stillness that follows a night of youthful exuberance. No one could have known that a shadow was moving through the darkness, drawn to the house for reasons that would remain elusive for months. At 4:17 a.m., a call was placed from Kaylee's phone to her ex-boyfriend, Jack Duker. Then another, and another. 6 calls in total, all unanswered, the last at 4:25 a.m. The calls were not unusual. Kaylee and Jack had remained close after their breakup, but their timing would later haunt investigators. By the time the sun climbed over the horizon, the house on King Road was no longer a home, but a tomb. Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan lay dead, victims of a brutal knife attack that left their bodies bloodied and their futures stolen. The two surviving roommates, Bethany and Dylan, slept through the horror, unaware of the tragedy unfolding above them. It wasn't until nearly noon that the first signs of something wrong emerged. Bethany and Dylan, waking to an eerily quiet house, found one of their roommates unresponsive. Panicked, they called friends for help, and one of those friends dialed 911 at 11:58 a.m. The call was frantic, reporting an unconscious person. When police arrived, they were met with a scene of unimaginable carnage. Blood stained the walls and floors, pooling around the bodies of the 4 victims. Each had been stabbed multiple times, the wounds deep and deliberate, inflicted with a large, fixed-blade knife. The brutality suggested rage, precision, or both. The surviving roommates were unharmed but in shock, unable to comprehend the nightmare that had unfolded under their roof. Moscow, a town of 25,000 where violent crime was rare, was thrust into a state of fear and confusion. The police sealed off the house, yellow tape stretching across the yard like a wound across the community's heart. Students huddled in dorms, Parents flooded the town to retrieve their children, and rumors spread like wildfire. Was it a random attack? A targeted killing? A serial killer on the loose? The lack of immediate answers only deepened the unease. The Moscow Police Department, unaccustomed to handling such high-profile cases, issued a statement confirming the deaths but offered little else. "We do not believe there is an ongoing threat to the community," they said, a claim that did little to quell the growing panic. As investigators combed the crime scene, the absence of a murder weapon or clear motive complicated their work. The house yielded a wealth of evidence, fingerprints, DNA, and traces of the victims' lives, but nothing pointed to an obvious suspect. The police interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances, including Jack Ducour, whose unanswered calls from Kaylee's phone raised initial suspicion. But Jack had an alibi, and his grief was palpable. The food truck where Kaylee and Madison had stopped was another lead, with security footage showing the two women chatting casually with a man in a hoodie. He was quickly ruled out. The surviving roommates, too, were questioned, their accounts consistent but offering no clear insight into the killer's identity. Days turned into weeks, and the case grew colder. The town's fear gave way to frustration, with students and residents demanding answers. The victims' families, particularly Kaylee's parents, Steve and Christy Goncalves, became vocal advocates for justice. Steve, a burly man with a voice roughened by grief, spoke to reporters with raw honesty. "We're not going away," he said, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "Someone knows something. Someone did this." The families hired private investigators and attorneys, determined to keep the case in the public eye. Meanwhile, the internet exploded with speculation. True crime enthusiasts on platforms like Reddit and TikTok dissected every detail, from the layout of the house to the timing of the 911 call. Some theories were outlandish, cults, drug deals gone wrong, but others pointed to a chilling possibility. The killer was someone who knew the victims, someone who had watched them, waited, and struck with purpose. On December 7, 2022, the investigation took a turn. Across the country in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, police arrested a 28-year-old graduate student named Kira Sreger. Sreger, a PhD candidate in criminology at Washington State University in Pullman, just 10 miles from Moscow, was an unlikely suspect at first glance. Tall and lanky, with a quiet demeanor and a penchant for academic rigor, Sreger seemed more at home in a lecture hall than a crime scene. But as details emerged, a darker picture took shape. Sreger had been studying criminal behavior, with a particular interest in the psychology of violent offenders. He had posted online surveys seeking participants to discuss their criminal fantasies, a detail that sent chills through those following the case. His academic pursuits, once innocuous, now seemed like a blueprint for something sinister. The arrest came after weeks of meticulous police work. A white Hyundai Elantra, spotted near the crime scene through grainy security footage, became a key piece of evidence. The car, registered to Sreger, was traced to his apartment in Pullman. When police searched his vehicle and home, they found items that raised alarms. A knife sheath with a partial DNA profile matching Sreger, traces of blood, and a collection of true crime books and articles that mirrored the Moscow killings. Cell phone data placed Sreger's phone in the vicinity of King Road multiple times in the weeks leading up to the murders, including the early hours of November 13th. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, painting a portrait of a man who may have turned his academic fascination into a deadly reality. Sreger's background added layers to the mystery. Born in Pennsylvania, he had grown up in a middle-class family, the son of a maintenance worker and a school aide. He was a bright but socially awkward child, often described as a loner who preferred books to people. After earning a bachelor's degree in psychology, he pursued advanced degrees, eventually landing at Washington State University. Classmates described him as intense, with a habit of dominating conversations about crime and justice. He was always talking about the mind of a killer, one peer recalled. It was like he was trying to solve a puzzle no one else could see. Yet there was no history of violence, no criminal record, nothing to suggest he was capable of such an act. As news of Sredger's arrest spread, the public grappled with conflicting emotions. Relief that a suspect was in custody mingled with disbelief that a seemingly ordinary student could commit such a heinous crime. The victims' families, while cautious, expressed hope that justice was within reach. "If this is the guy, I want to look him in the eye," Steve Goncalves said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. "I want to know why he took my little girl." The legal process began in earnest in January 2023, when Sredger was extradited to Idaho to face 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. The Lada County Courthouse in Moscow became the epicenter of the case, its small brick building dwarfed by the swarm of reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Sredger, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, appeared stoic during his initial hearings, his dark eyes scanning the courtroom without expression. His defense attorney and Taylor, a seasoned public defender, argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Sredger's academic interests were being misconstrued as motive. "My client is a scholar, not a killer," she told the judge, her voice firm but measured. The prosecution, led by Lada County Prosecutor Bill Thompson, painted a different picture. They described Sredger as a methodical predator who had stalked his victims, possibly driven by a desire to test his academic theories in the real world. The knife sheath, found under Madison Mogen's body, was a critical piece of evidence. It bore a partial DNA profile that, while not a definitive match, strongly suggested Sredger's involvement. The prosecution also introduced cell phone records showing Sredger's movements near the crime scene, as well as testimony from a surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen, who reported seeing a masked figure leaving the house around 4:20 a.m. Her description, tall, thin, with bushy eyebrows, aligned with Sredger's appearance. As the case moved toward trial, the defense faced an uphill battle. Sredger's team filed motions to suppress evidence, arguing that the search of his apartment and car violated his Fourth Amendment rights. They also challenged the reliability of the DNA evidence, noting that the partial profile could belong to countless individuals. But the court denied most of these motions, and the weight of public opinion leaned heavily against Sredger. Social media platforms buzzed with amateur sleuths analyzing every detail of his life, from his vegan diet to his late-night drives. Some speculated that he had chosen the victims at random, a chilling thought that deepened the community's sense of vulnerability. The trial began in June 2024, a year and a half after the murders. The courtroom was packed, with the victims' families seated in the front row, their faces etched with grief and resolve. Kaylee's mother, Christy, clutched a photo of her daughter, her fingers tracing the edges as if to hold onto her memory. The prosecution opened with a harrowing account of the crime scene, describing the ferocity of the attacks and the terror the victims must have felt. They called forensic experts to testify about the DNA, blood spatter, and wound patterns, which suggested a single assailant with a military-style knife. A particularly damning moment came when a digital forensics expert revealed that Sredger had searched online for how to clean blood stains and DNA evidence in murder cases in the days following the killings. The defense countered with a strategy of reasonable doubt. They presented alibi witnesses who claimed Sredger was in Pullman, working on his dissertation, during the early hours of November 13th. They also called a DNA expert who questioned the validity of the partial profile, arguing that contamination was possible in a house frequented by dozens of people. Perhaps most controversially, they suggested that the surviving roommates' accounts were unreliable, pointing to inconsistencies in their timelines and the trauma-induced haze of their memories. "The prosecution wants you to believe my client is a monster," and Taylor told the jury. But the evidence tells a different story, one of assumption, not fact. The trial stretched over 3 months, each day a grueling procession of testimony, exhibits, and emotional outbursts. The victims' families sat through graphic descriptions of their loved ones' injuries, their pain palpable in the courtroom's stifling air. Steve Goncalves, unable to contain his anguish, stormed out during a particularly brutal forensic testimony, his sobs echoing in the hallway. The media frenzy grew, with outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian publishing detailed analyses of the case, while true crime podcasts dissected every twist and turn. The public's fascination was insatiable, fueled by the juxtaposition of a quiet college town and a crime of such savagery. Sredger himself remained an enigma. He rarely spoke, even to his attorneys, and his silence was interpreted by some as arrogance, by others as fear. During a rare moment on the stand, he answered questions in a flat, academic tone, describing his research into criminal psychology and denying any involvement in the murders. "I study crime," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't commit it." The jury watched him closely, searching for a crack in his composure, but he gave them little to work with. As closing arguments approached, the prosecution leaned heavily on the emotional weight of the case. 4 young people were taken from their families, their friends, their futures, Bill Thompson said, his voice breaking. Kira Sredger thought he could outsmart the system, but the evidence speaks for itself. The defense, in contrast, urged the jury to focus on the gaps in the case. "You cannot convict a man based on speculation," and Taylor argued. "The prosecution has given you a story, not proof." The jury deliberated for 6 days, an agonizing wait for everyone involved. The families gathered in a small room off the courthouse, holding hands and praying for justice. On the morning of September 12, 2024, the verdict was announced, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a mix of gasps and muffled sobs. Sredger showed no emotion, his gaze fixed on the floor as the judge scheduled a sentencing hearing for the following month. Outside, the victims' families embraced, their relief tempered by the knowledge that no verdict could bring back their loved ones. At the sentencing hearing in October 2024, the courtroom was again filled with emotion. The families delivered impact statements, each one a raw testament to their loss. Christy Goncalves spoke of Kaylee's dreams, her voice trembling as she described the hole left in their family. "You didn't just kill my daughter," she said, staring at Sredger. "You killed a part of all of us." Ethan's mother, Stacy Chapin, spoke of her son's gentle spirit, while Xana's father, Jeffrey Kernadle, struggled to contain his anger. "You're a coward," he spat. "You hid in the dark and took everything from us." Sredger, given the chance to speak, offered no apology, only a brief statement maintaining his innocence. "I didn't do this," he said, his voice hollow. The judge, unmoved, sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms without parole, ensuring he would never walk free again. The aftermath of the trial left Moscow changed. The house on King Road was demolished, its presence too painful for the community to bear. The University of Idaho established scholarships in the victims' names, a small gesture to honor their memory. The families, while grateful for the conviction, faced the long road of healing, their grief a constant companion. Steve Goncalves became an advocate for victims' rights, channeling his pain into a fight for stronger laws and better support for families of violent crime. Kira Sredger's conviction closed one chapter of the tragedy, but it opened others. Appeals are ongoing, with his defense team arguing that the trial was tainted by media bias and prosecutorial overreach. True crime enthusiasts continue to debate the case, some questioning whether Sredger acted alone or if others were involved. The lack of a clear motive, Sredger never confessed or explained his actions, leaves a lingering unease, a reminder that some questions may never be answered. The King Road murders remain a wound on the heart of Moscow, a town that once felt safe and untouched by the world's darkness. For those who knew Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, the pain is personal, a loss that time can never fully mend. Their lives, so full of promise, were cut short in a moment of inexplicable violence, but their memories endure in the love of their families, the strength of their community, and the resolve to seek justice in their names. The story of Kira Sredger and the Moscow murders is one of horror, but it is also one of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of those who refuse to let darkness have the final word. Story 4. The autumn night of October 15, 2016, draped Freiburg im Breisgau in a quiet chill. The German university town, nestled at the edge of the Black Forest, buzzed with the gentle hum of student life. Cobblestone streets echoed with laughter from late-night gatherings, and the Dreisam River flowed softly under the moonlight, its waters reflecting the city's historic charm. Maria Leidenberger, a 19-year-old medical student at the University of Freiburg, pedaled her bicycle through the crisp air, her mind likely lingering on the party she had just left. Her life, filled with promise and purpose, was about to be stolen in a crime that would shake Germany to its core, ignite fierce debates, and leave a lasting scar on a community that prided itself on safety and openness. Maria was no ordinary student. The daughter of Dr. Clemens Leidenberger, a senior legal advisor to the European Commission, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that belied her youth. Her dark hair framed a face that radiated warmth, and her eyes sparkled with the curiosity of someone dedicated to healing others. At the University of Freiburg, she was known for her diligence in her medical studies and her compassion for those less fortunate. In her spare time, she volunteered at local refugee shelters, offering help to newcomers in a country navigating the complexities of a historic migrant influx. That night, she had attended a party hosted by the university's medical faculty, a lively affair filled with music, conversation, and the carefree spirit of youth. At 2:37 a.m., she said her goodbyes, hopped on her bicycle, and began the short ride home, her route taking her near the Schwarzwald Stadion, a local sports arena. The path was familiar, lined with trees and the soft gurgle of the Dreisam River nearby. Freiburg, with its low crime rate and picturesque charm, felt like a safe haven for students like Maria. But as she cycled through the darkness, a figure watched from the shadows. Hussein Kavari, a young man whose life had been shaped by displacement and deception, was there, his intentions as dark as the night itself. Kavari, who had entered Germany as an unaccompanied refugee in November 2015, was no stranger to violence. Unknown to German authorities, he carried a history that would soon unravel, exposing cracks in the systems meant to protect both citizens and newcomers. Maria never made it home. Somewhere along the path, Kavari attacked. He pushed her from her bicycle, the metal frame clattering to the ground as she struggled against his grip. The assault was brutal. Kavari raped her, choked her with a scarf, and left her unconscious on the riverbank. The Dreisam's shallow waters claimed her life, her body submerged and lifeless as the current carried away traces of the horror. It was shortly after 3 a.m. when Maria, a singular ray of sunshine as her parents would later describe her, was gone forever. The morning brought a grim discovery. A jogger, out for an early run along the Dreisam, spotted a figure in the water. At first, he thought it might be debris, but as he drew closer, the truth became clear. Maria's body, pale and still, lay partially submerged, her bicycle abandoned nearby. The jogger's call to the police shattered the morning's calm, and soon the riverbank was cordoned off, officers moving with a quiet urgency that belied the town's shock. Freiburg, a place where violent crime was a rarity, was suddenly confronted with a tragedy that felt alien in its brutality. The Freiburg police, led by Chief David Muller, formed a special commission of 68 officers to tackle the case. They questioned over 1,400 people, followed 1,600 leads, and combed the crime scene for evidence. A long strand of hair, partially dyed blonde, was found in the bushes near the riverbank, along with a black scarf bearing traces of DNA. These clues, small but significant, would prove pivotal. The police also reviewed CCTV footage from a nearby tram, capturing a figure with a distinctive undercut hairstyle. The investigation was exhaustive, but weeks passed without a breakthrough, and the town's fear grew. Maria's parents, Dr. Clemens and Friederike Leidenberger, were devastated, their grief compounded by the public's growing unrest. The memorial notice they placed in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung spoke of Maria as a singular ray of sunshine, a sentiment echoed by her friends and professors, who described her as a beacon of kindness and potential. The case sparked a firestorm of public reaction. Germany was in the midst of a heated debate over Chancellor Angela Merkel's open-door refugee policy, which had welcomed over 1 million migrants since 2015. Maria's volunteer work with refugees added a layer of complexity to the tragedy, and rumors swirled about the perpetrator's identity. The police, under pressure to deliver answers, worked tirelessly, their efforts hampered by the absence of a clear suspect. Then, on December 3, 2016, a breakthrough came. A street patrol identified a young man matching the CCTV description. His name was Hussein Kavari, a 17-year-old Afghan refugee who had arrived in Germany the previous year. A search of his belongings revealed a connection to the crime scene. DNA on the scarf and hair evidence linked him to the riverbank. He was arrested, and Freiburg held its breath. Kavari's background was a tangled web of contradictions. He had entered Germany claiming to be an unaccompanied minor from Afghanistan, born in 1999. He was granted asylum and placed with a foster family in Freiburg, where he attended school and received state benefits. But his past told a different story. In 2013, he had been convicted in Greece of attempting to rob and murder a young woman by pushing her off a cliff in Corfu. Sentenced to 10 years, he was released after just 18 months due to a Greek amnesty for juvenile offenders. He fled to Germany, his criminal history undetected due to a lack of international coordination. The revelation of his past fueled public outrage, raising questions about the vetting of refugees and the failures of European information-sharing systems. As Kavari awaited trial, the investigation deepened. His iPhone's health tracking app provided crucial evidence, mapping his movements on the night of the murder. A forensic analysis of a tooth suggested he was not 17, but between 22 and 29 years old, a finding corroborated by his father, who, in a stunning courtroom moment, confirmed Kavari's birth year as 1984, making him 32 at the time of the crime. These revelations shifted the case from juvenile to adult court, where the stakes were far higher. The police also uncovered evidence that Kavari had molested 2 other women on a Freiburg tram shortly before the attack, a chilling sign of his escalating violence. The trial began in September 2017 at the Landgericht Freiburg, a somber affair that drew international attention. The courtroom, a stark contrast to Freiburg's idyllic streets, was filled with reporters, mourners, and curious citizens. Maria's parents sat in the front row, their faces etched with grief. Dr. Clemens, a tall man with a scholarly demeanor, held his wife's hand tightly, their shared pain a silent force in the room. Kavari, handcuffed and wearing a black hooded jumper, appeared detached, his expression unreadable. His defense team argued that he was a troubled youth, diminished by alcohol and drug use, but the prosecution, led by Eckhart Berger, presented a damning case. They described Kavari as a predator who had targeted Maria with chilling premeditation, pointing to his internet searches for how to clean blood stains and his history of violence. The evidence was overwhelming. The DNA on the scarf, the hair at the crime scene, and the CCTV footage formed a tight net around Kavari. A surveillance video from the tram showed him harassing other women, and his cellmate testified that Kavari had admitted to a prior rape in Iran at age 14, further painting him as a serial offender. A psychiatric expert, Hartmut Pleins, testified that Kavari showed no signs of mental illness, but had a low threshold for violence and a manipulative personality. Greek police officers who had investigated his Corfu crime described him as indifferent, recalling his chilling remark about a female victim. "That's just a woman." Kavari took the stand, his voice soft but steady. He admitted to the rape and murder, claiming he was intoxicated and overcome by impulse. "I saw how pretty she was," he said, his words sending a shiver through the courtroom. "I wanted to have sex with her." He described choking Maria with the scarf and dragging her into the river to wash her blood from him, claiming remorse but offering no real explanation. The prosecution disputed his account, arguing that the attack was planned and deliberate. A psychiatric report labeled his remorse as insincere, warning of a high risk of reoffending due to his hostile attitude toward women. The trial was a crucible for Germany's broader struggles. Maria's murder became a flashpoint in the debate over immigration, with far-right groups like the Alternative für Deutschland, AfD, seizing on the case to fuel anti-refugee sentiment. Social media posts sarcastically thanked Merkel for her policies, while others, including Freiburg's mayor, Dieter Salomon, urged restraint, insisting that the crime was an isolated act. The prosecution emphasized that the trial was about Kavari's actions, not Germany's refugee policy, but the public discourse was impossible to contain. The case also highlighted systemic failures. Greece's failure to issue an international warrant and the lack of a fingerprint match in the EU's Eurodac system had allowed Kavari to slip through the cracks. On March 22, 2018, the court delivered its verdict. Kavari was convicted of aggravated rape and murder, sentenced to life imprisonment with a note of particular severity of guilt, ensuring he would serve at least 15 years before any possibility of review. The judge, Catherine Schenk, cited his extreme lack of empathy and slim chances of rehabilitation, ordering preventive detention to protect society. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, save for the soft sobs of Maria's family. Outside, protesters clashed, some demanding stricter immigration laws, others calling for justice without prejudice. The aftermath was profound. Freiburg increased police presence, and Baden-Württemberg's Minister of Justice, Guido Wolf, pushed for expanded DNA analysis in criminal investigations, sparking a debate over privacy and ethics. The Leidenberger family, devastated but dignified, retreated from the public eye. Their memorial notice for Maria, published months earlier, lingered in the public's consciousness. "We thank God for this gift, that He made you with us. We are sure that she is safe with Him." A requiem mass in Brussels honored her memory, and the University of Freiburg established a scholarship in her name, a small tribute to her unrealized potential. The case left lingering questions. Why had Maria been targeted? Was it random, or had Kavari known of her volunteer work? His silence on these matters fueled speculation, and the lack of a clear motive deepened the tragedy's mystery. Appeals followed, with Kavari's defense arguing that media bias and procedural errors tainted the trial, but the conviction held firm. The case continued to resonate, a symbol of both personal loss and societal reckoning. For Maria's family, the pain was private, a wound carried in silence. For Freiburg, it was a collective loss, a reminder that even in a city of light, darkness could strike without warning. Maria Leidenberger's life, though brief, left an indelible mark. Her compassion, her brilliance, and her untimely death became a story of love and loss, of justice sought and found, and of a nation grappling with its values in the face of unspeakable tragedy. The Dreisam River still flows through Freiburg, its waters a quiet witness to a life taken too soon, and a community forever changed. Story 5. The winter morning of January 24, 2006, dawned cold and gray over Mitcham, a working-class suburb in South London. The streets, lined with modest terraced houses and the occasional corner shop, hummed with the quiet rhythm of daily life. In one such house on Morden Road, 20-year-old Banaz Mahmoud lay curled on the living room sofa, her breathing soft and uneven, her body still recovering from a night of fear and alcohol. She was unaware that this would be her final morning, that the family she had tried so desperately to escape would soon close in, their hands guided by a warped sense of honor that would extinguish her life in a crime so brutal it would shock Britain and expose the hidden scourge of honor-based violence. Banaz was a young woman caught between two worlds. Born in Iraqi Kurdistan in 1985, she had come to the United Kingdom at age 10 with her family, fleeing persecution and seeking asylum. The Mahmouds were a traditional Kurdish family from the rural Miradale tribal area of Kaladiza, their values rooted in a rigid code of honor that prized family reputation above all else. Banaz, with her dark eyes and quiet demeanor, was the second youngest of 5 daughters, her life shaped by the expectations of her father, Mahmoud Babakir Mahmoud, and her uncle, Ariaga Mahmoud, the de facto head of the family. Her childhood in London was marked by strict control, her movements monitored, her choices dictated. At 16 or 17, she was forced into an arranged marriage with a man from Kaladiza, a decade older, illiterate, and steeped in the traditions of a bygone era. The marriage was a nightmare. Banaz endured years of rape and beatings, her cries for help met with indifference from her family, who saw her suffering as a necessary sacrifice to preserve their standing in the Kurdish community. By July 2005, Banaz had reached her breaking point. She left her husband, a decision that branded her a source of shame in her family's eyes. Returning to the Mahmud household, she found no refuge. Her father and uncle, furious at her defiance, viewed her as a stain on their honor, a perception deepened by her budding relationship with Ramith Soleimani, a 28-year-old Iranian Kurdish man she had met through friends. Ramith was kind, modern, and respectful, everything her husband was not. Their love, though cautious and often secret, was a lifeline for Banaz, a flicker of hope in a life constrained by fear. But to her family, it was an unforgivable betrayal, a direct challenge to their authority and the tribal code that governed their lives. The Mahmud household was a pressure cooker of tension. Banaz's eldest sister had been married off in an arranged union, as had her younger sister, Paisy, wed at 16 to a man 15 years her senior. Another sister, Bikal, 2 years older than Banaz, had fled the family in 2002 after enduring physical abuse for adopting Western clothing and friendships her father disapproved of. Bikal's escape, which landed her in foster care and later in hiding, was seen as a humiliation, proof of Mahmud's failure to control his daughters. The family's reputation in the tight-knit Kurdish community of South London was precarious, and Banaz's actions, leaving her husband and loving Ramith, threatened to unravel it entirely. Whispers of disgrace circulated, and Ari, the domineering uncle, took charge, determined to restore the family's honor through the ultimate act of violence. Banaz sensed the danger. She was no stranger to fear, having grown up under her father's heavy hand and the community's judgmental gaze. In the months leading up to January 2006, she sought help repeatedly, her desperation growing with each encounter. She contacted the Metropolitan Police 4 times, reporting threats to her life and naming those she believed would harm her, including her father, uncle, and several associates. On December 2, 2005, she overheard a chilling phone call between her mother, Bahaya, and Ari, discussing plans to kill her and Ramith for their shameful relationship. Banaz rushed to Wimbledon Police Station, delivering a handwritten letter listing 5 men she feared would murder her: Ari, Mahmud, and 3 others from the community. The police response was tepid, her warnings dismissed as exaggerated or cultural misunderstandings. The danger escalated on New Year's Eve 2005. Banaz's father plied her with alcohol, an unusual act that left her disoriented and vulnerable. As she sat in her grandmother's house in Wimbledon, Mahmud attempted to kill her, his hands closing around her throat before she broke free, smashing a window to escape. Bleeding and terrified, she stumbled into a nearby cafe, where staff called the police. PC Angela Corns, the officer who interviewed her, found Banaz's story unconvincing, describing her as manipulative and melodramatic in her report. Corns even considered charging Banaz with criminal damage for the broken window, a decision that would later haunt the force. At the hospital, Banaz recounted the incident to Ramith, who recorded her trembling voice on his phone, a piece of evidence that would prove crucial. "I'm really scared," she whispered, her words a plea that went unheeded. Despite the failed attempt on her life, Banaz clung to a fragile hope. She was urged by police to stay in a safe house, but she refused, believing her mother's presence at home would protect her. Ramith too faced threats. On January 22, 2006, 3 men, later identified as Mohammed Merid Hama, Muhammad Salah Ali, and Omar Hussein, all named in Banaz's letter, attempted to kidnap him, their voices laced with menace as they warned him to end the relationship. Both Banaz and Ramith reported the incident to the police, and Banaz was scheduled to return to the station on January 24th. She never made it. That morning, as her parents left to take her youngest sister to school and run errands, Banaz was alone in the Morden Road house. The air was still, the silence broken only by the hum of a distant heater. Around 8 a.m., Hama, Ali, and Hussein arrived, their faces set with purpose. What followed was a descent into unimaginable horror. For over 2 hours, Banaz was subjected to rape and torture, her body battered by the men her family had enlisted to erase their shame. Hama, the ringleader, later bragged in a chilling prison conversation that he had garroted her with a ligature, stamping on her neck for half an hour to let her soul out. Her final moments were a struggle for breath, her spirit defiant even as her life was stolen. The men stuffed her body into a suitcase, drove it to a house in Handsworth, Birmingham, and buried it in a shallow grave in the garden, the soil cold and unforgiving. On January 25th, Rummuth reported Banaz missing, his voice cracking with panic as he dialed the police. The Metropolitan Police, initially skeptical, were swayed by his persistence and the inconsistencies in the Mahmud family's story. Mahmud and Bahaya portrayed themselves as tolerant, claiming Banaz often stayed out overnight, but Rummuth's phone records and Banaz's prior reports painted a different picture. The investigation, led by Detective Chief Inspector Caroline Good, shifted into high gear. Good, a seasoned officer with a reputation for tenacity, sensed the gravity of the case. Raids were conducted across London, targeting the Mahmud family and their associates, but Banaz was nowhere to be found. Her phone had been inactive since January 23rd, and her bank account remained untouched. The breakthrough came on February 4th, 2006, when Mohammed Hama was charged with murder. While in custody at Belmarsh Prison, he was covertly recorded boasting about the killing, implicating Ari, Ali, Hussein, and another cousin, Dana Amin. The recordings, combined with phone and vehicle tracking data, led police to the Birmingham garden, where Banaz's body was unearthed on April 28, 2006. The sight was harrowing, a young woman's life reduced to a crumpled form in a suitcase, her face unrecognizable, her dreams buried with her. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of Good and her team, who now faced the daunting task of bringing a tight-knit community's conspirators to justice. The trial began in April 2007 at the Old Bailey, London's historic Central Criminal Court. The courtroom, with its oak paneling and high ceilings, was a stage for a tragedy that gripped the nation. Mahmud and Ari, both in their early 50s, sat impassively, their faces betraying no remorse. Hama, who had pleaded guilty, provided damning testimony, his recorded boasts played for the jury. Banaz's sister Bikal, now 22 and living in hiding, took the stand, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. She spoke of the family's brutality, the beatings, and the honor code that justified their actions. Her testimony, a rare act of defiance against her community, came at a cost. She entered witness protection, her life forever altered. Rummuth, too, testified, his grief raw as he recounted their love and the threats that shadowed it. "My life goes away when Banaz died," he said, his voice breaking. "The only thing keeping me going was justice for her." The prosecution, led by Victor Temple, QC, painted a chilling picture of a premeditated murder orchestrated by Mahmud and Ari. The evidence was overwhelming. Banaz's letter to the police, Rummuth's video, Hama's confessions, and forensic traces linking the suitcase to the Birmingham property. The defense argued that cultural misunderstandings had exaggerated the case, but the jury was unmoved. On June 11, 2007, Mahmud and Ari were convicted of murder, with Ari also found guilty of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Hama, already convicted, faced sentencing alongside them. On July 19th, all three were handed life sentences, with minimum terms of 20, 23, and 17 years, respectively. The judge, Brian Barker, condemned their barbaric act, emphasizing that there is no honor in murder. The case was far from over. Ali and Hussein had fled to Iraqi Kurdistan, where they hid among family and tribal networks. In a historic move, Scotland Yard pursued their extradition, a first from Iraq to the UK. Ali was arrested in Sulaymaniyah in October 2007 after a hit-and-run incident, extradited in June 2009, and convicted of murder in 2010, receiving a 20-year sentence. Hussein, shot in the leg during a family dispute, was apprehended in December 2009 and extradited in March 2010. He too was convicted, sentenced to life with a 21-year minimum. Dana Amin, the final conspirator, was convicted in 2011, closing a chapter on a crime that spanned continents. The aftermath exposed systemic failures. The Independent Police Complaints Commission, IPCC, investigated the Metropolitan and West Midlands Police, finding that Banaz had been let down by delays, insensitivity, and poor supervision. PC Angela Corns and a supervising inspector faced disciplinary panels, with Corns's dismissal of Banaz's fears cited as a grievous error. 7 other officers received written warnings, and 2 were offered training. The IPCC's report, released in April 2008, prompted reforms, including better training on honor-based violence and stricter protocols for handling domestic abuse complaints. The case also spurred legislative changes, with the UK strengthening laws against forced marriage and honor-based abuse, culminating in the Antisocial Behavior, Crime and Policing Act 2014, which criminalized forced marriage. Banaz's family bore the scars of her loss. Bikal, in witness protection, lived under constant threat, her courage a testament to her sister's memory. Paisley, who later spoke out about the hell of losing Banaz, became an advocate with charities like Karma Nirvana, raising awareness about honor killings. Their mother, Bahaya, was not charged but lived in the shadow of her complicity, her silence during Banaz's pleas a haunting question mark. The Kurdish community in South London was divided. Some condemned the Mahmuds, others clung to tradition, viewing the sisters' defiance as a betrayal. Rahmat, heartbroken, faded from public view, his life forever altered by the loss of his love. The case became a touchstone in the UK's fight against honor-based violence, which dramatized Good's investigation, though Paisley criticized it for focusing on the police rather than Banaz's story. Reports, like one from the University of Central Lancashire in 2021, marked the case's 15th anniversary, noting its role in highlighting police failures and cultural blind spots. Banaz's grave, initially unmarked, was given a granite headstone in 2007, funded by the Iranian and Kurdish Women's Rights Organization and contributions from Good and prosecutor Nazir Afzal. The memorial service at Morden Assembly Hall was a quiet act of reclamation, a refusal to let Banaz's life be defined by her death. Banaz Mahmud's murder was a tragedy that transcended its brutality, forcing Britain to confront the hidden violence within its communities. Her courage in seeking help, her love for Rahmat, and her refusal to bow to oppression made her a symbol of resistance. The streets of Mitcham, once silent witnesses to her fear, now carry her legacy, a call for justice, awareness, and change. Her story, etched in the pain of those who loved her and the reforms that followed, remains a beacon, illuminating the dark corners where honor and violence collide. Story 6. The morning of October 6, 1998, dawned cool and quiet in Panama City, Florida, a coastal town where the rhythm of life often moved with the tides. Ronald Stovall, a 30-year-old Navy veteran and UPS driver, rose at 3 a.m., as he did most days, to prepare for his early shift. The house on Lullwater Drive was still, save for the soft clatter of his wife, Angelica, preparing his lunch in the kitchen. Their 2 young daughters, one from Angelica's previous relationship, the other their own, slept soundly in their rooms. The couple moved through their morning routine with the ease of familiarity, a ritual honed by love and necessity. Ron, with his steady demeanor and quiet strength, was the kind of man who carried the weight of his responsibilities without complaint. But as he stepped out the front door into the pre-dawn darkness, the world he knew shattered in an instant. A sharp crack split the air, gunfire. Angelica froze, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. Another shot followed, then another, each one louder, closer, more terrifying. She heard the door slam open, and Ron stumbled back into the house, his breath ragged, blood soaking through his shirt. He leaned against the door, his body a barrier against whatever was coming. But the attacker was relentless. Bullets tore through the wooden door, splintering it, striking Ron again. Angelica's heart pounded as she ran toward the foyer, her bare feet slipping on the tile. She saw him, her husband, her anchor, collapse to the floor, his eyes wide with pain and fear. The assailant forced his way inside, a silver gun gleaming in his hand. Angelica, her instincts sharpened by terror, lunged at him, grabbing for the weapon. For a fleeting moment, she felt the cold metal under her fingers, but he was stronger. He yanked the gun back, aimed it at her, and fired. The bullet missed, grazing the air beside her head. "This is for her," the man said, his voice low and deliberate, before turning the gun back on Ron. Another shot rang out, this one louder, final. Angelica fled to the bedroom, barricading herself behind the door, her trembling hands dialing 911 as the sound of her daughter's cries pierced the chaos. She whispered into the phone, her voice barely audible, "He's going to kill us all." When the police arrived minutes later, the house was silent, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. They found Ron sprawled on the kitchen floor, his body still, his life extinguished by 3 bullets to the back, 1 to the hip, and a final, fatal shot to the head. Bloody footprints with a distinctive double H pattern trailed across the tile, leading nowhere. Angelica emerged from the bedroom, her face streaked with tears, her voice hoarse from screaming. She told the officers what she had seen. A white man with brown hair, brown eyes, perhaps a mustache, his words. "This is for her," burned into her memory. The police secured the scene, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but the killer was gone, vanished into the night. Detective Dan Bates of the Panama City Police Department stood in the foyer, his notepad in hand, his eyes scanning the chaos. The brutality of the scene suggested something personal, a grudge carried out with ruthless precision. "This wasn't random," he said to his partner, Detective Robert Colbert, as they surveyed the bullet holes in the door. "This was execution. The question was who and why." Angelica, still shaking, pointed them toward a name, Tina Trexler, Ron's ex-wife. The couple had been locked in a bitter custody dispute over their daughter, a battle that had grown increasingly tense in recent months. Could it be connected? Bates and Colbert exchanged a glance. They had a lead, but it was only the beginning. Ron Stovall's life had been one of quiet determination. Born in 1968, he grew up in a working-class family, his childhood marked by the values of discipline and duty. He joined the Navy young, serving with pride before settling in Panama City, where the beaches and small-town charm suited his grounded nature. At UPS, he was known as a reliable driver, always on time, always professional. But his heart was at home with Angelica and their daughters. He had met Tina Trexler in 1989, and their marriage produced a daughter, but it unraveled after 6 years, ending in divorce in 1995. The shared custody of their daughter had been a source of constant friction, especially after Ron married Angelica in 1997 and welcomed another child in 1998. Ron had recently filed for full custody, citing concerns about his daughter's well-being with Tina. The court date loomed in early November, a ticking clock that seemed to hang over the investigation. Tina Trexler was a woman of contradictions. To some, she was a devoted mother, fiercely protective of her daughter. To others, she was volatile, prone to emotional outbursts. When Bates and Colbert brought her in for questioning, she sat across from them in the interrogation room, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "I was at my parents' house in bed," she said, her voice flat. "I didn't have anything to do with this." But there was no trace of grief, no hint of sorrow for the man who had once been her husband. "She was cold," Colbert later recalled, his brow furrowing at the memory. "No tears, no shock, just nothing." Tina's mother, Priscilla Ann Trexler, known to everyone as Ann, backed her daughter's alibi, her soft-spoken demeanor painting the picture of a concerned grandmother. But something about the interview didn't sit right with the detectives. Tina's claim of a cordial relationship with Ron and Angelica clashed with Angelica's account of ongoing hostility. And then there was the lawyer who arrived mid-interview, abruptly ending the conversation. The detectives left the station with more questions than answers. The investigation widened. Tina had a boyfriend, Adrian Harris, who lived in Baltimore, Maryland. Angelica had mentioned bad blood between Adrian and Ron, stemming from arguments over Tina's treatment. The detectives flew north to interview him. Adrian admitted to the tension, but insisted he was at work in Baltimore at 7:30 a.m. on the day of the murder, making it impossible for him to have been in Florida at 3 a.m. His alibi held up, but his roommate, a man named Guy, matched Angelica's description of the shooter. The detectives' pulses quickened. They conducted a photo lineup, and Angelica pointed to Guy without hesitation. "That's him," she said, her voice trembling. A search of their apartment turned up shoes with a double H pattern on the soles, eerily similar to the prints at the crime scene. But Guy's alibi was ironclad. Surveillance footage placed him at work in Baltimore during the murder. Angelica, devastated, admitted she might have been mistaken, the trauma of that night clouding her memory. Weeks passed, and the case grew colder. The autopsy report confirmed 2 weapons were used, a .357 handgun and a shotgun, suggesting a deliberate, calculated attack. The detectives pored over evidence, chasing leads that led nowhere. Then, a break came from an unexpected source, the Panama City Beach Police Department. They had arrested a man named Antonio Tony Perez in connection with a home invasion. Perez, a career criminal with suspected ties to organized crime, was found with 2 handguns and a short-barreled shotgun. The detectives' instincts flared. Perez matched Angelica's description: brown hair, brown eyes, a mustache. During an interview, he was cocky, joking about other crimes but denying any involvement in Ron's murder. "I heard he was dealing drugs," Perez said with a smirk, a claim the detectives knew was false. A search of his storage unit uncovered work boots with the telltale double H pattern. Ballistics tests confirmed the chilling truth. The slugs from Perez's guns matched those found in Ron's body. They had their man, or so they thought. Tony Perez was no stranger to violence. A wiry man with a rap sheet stretching back years, he had a reputation for taking on dirty jobs for the right price. But why would he target Ron Stovall, a man with no criminal ties, no enemies beyond a contentious ex-wife? The detectives dug into Perez's life, combing through his cell phone records. The trail led to a local hair salon owned by Kimberly Miller, a woman in her late 30s with a flair for drama and a tangled personal life. Miller admitted Perez did odd jobs at her salon, sweeping floors, shampooing hair, but claimed no knowledge of the murder. Then she dropped a bombshell. One of her regular clients was in Trexler, Tina's mother. The detectives' minds raced, and the soft-spoken grandmother had been a peripheral figure, barely registering on their radar. Could she be connected? They brought Ann in for another interview. She sat primly in the interrogation room, her hands folded in her lap, her gray hair neatly styled. "I loved Ron," she said, her voice quavering. "He was family. I would never hurt him." But her words rang hollow. The detectives pressed, but Ann asked for a lawyer, and the interview ended. Meanwhile, Perez's story began to shift. In a second interrogation, he admitted to killing Ron. "It was a job," he said, his eyes cold, "and Trexler paid me $10,000 to do it." The room went silent. Perez described meeting Ann at Miller's salon, where she vented about Ron's custody battle with Tina, and he claimed was desperate to protect her granddaughter, to keep her from Ron's grasp. The deal was struck. Perez would eliminate Ron, ensuring Tina's custody remained secure. The detectives were stunned, and Trexler, the grandmotherly figure who baked cookies and fussed over her family, was the mastermind behind a murder for hire? It seemed unthinkable, yet the pieces were falling into place. Phone records showed late-night calls between Miller and Perez, far too frequent for simple salon appointments. Financial records revealed withdrawals from Ann's account that matched the amounts Perez claimed he was paid. But the evidence was circumstantial, fragile. Without corroboration, charging would be a gamble. The detectives turned their attention to Kimberly Miller, the salon owner whose role seemed to bridge the conspirators. Miller was a wild card, a woman whose charm masked a calculating edge. She had been Perez's lover, a detail she downplayed when first questioned. Under pressure, she cracked. Prosecutors offered her a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony, and she took the deal. Kim sang like a songbird, State Attorney Jim Appleman later said, a wry smile crossing his face. Miller revealed that, and had ranted about Ron for months, her anger growing with each court hearing. She said he was going to take her granddaughter away, Miller told the detectives. She wanted him gone. Miller admitted to acting as the go-between, relaying messages between and Perez, facilitating the plot. The final piece was in place. On November 10, 1998, Tony Perez was charged with first-degree murder, and Trexler was arrested soon after, her face pale as she was led into the station in handcuffs. Kimberly Miller, granted immunity for her testimony, became the prosecution's star witness. Tina Trexler, though suspected of knowing more than she let on, was never charged. The evidence pointed to her mother as the driving force. The case was set for trial, and Panama City braced for a story that would unravel the facade of a quiet coastal town. The courtroom in Bay County was a study in contrasts. Polished wood benches filled with curious onlookers, the air heavy with anticipation, and the defendants, Tony Perez, swaggering in his orange jumpsuit, and Trexler, her face lined with worry, her hands trembling. The trial began in early 2000, with prosecutor Joe Grammer laying out a chilling narrative. This was no random act, he told the jury, his voice steady. This was a calculated plot, orchestrated by a grandmother who could not bear the thought of losing her granddaughter, carried out by a man who killed for money. The gallery murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others leaning forward, eager for every detail. Angelica took the stand first, her voice breaking as she recounted the night of the murder. She described Ron's final moments, the terror of facing the gunman, the words that haunted her. This is for her. The jury listened intently, some wiping tears from their eyes. Detectives Bates and Colbert detailed the investigation, from the bloody footprints to the ballistics match that tied Perez to the crime. But it was Kimberly Miller's testimony that electrified the room. She spoke of Anne's obsession with the custody battle, her late-night calls, her willingness to pay for Ron's death. She said it was the only way, Miller testified, her voice low but clear. She said Ron was tearing her family apart. Anne's defense team painted a different picture. They portrayed her as a loving grandmother, manipulated by Miller and Perez, both of whom had their own agendas. And Trexler is no killer, her attorney argued. She was a vulnerable woman, taken advantage of by a criminal and a scheming salon owner. Perez's defense, meanwhile, leaned on his claim that he acted under duress, though he offered little to substantiate it. The jury wasn't swayed. The evidence, phone records, financial transactions, Miller's testimony, was overwhelming. After a week of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. Tony Perez was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole, and Trexler was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to 25 years. Kimberly Miller, having turned state's witness, received a reduced sentence of 5 years probation. The courtroom was silent as the verdicts were read, the weight of the tragedy settling over everyone present. Angelica, sitting in the front row, wept quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For her, justice was a hollow victory. It could not bring Ron back. The aftermath of the trial left Panama City reeling. The story of a grandmother hiring a hitman to kill her former son-in-law shocked the community, shattering the illusion of small-town safety. Angelica struggled to rebuild her life, raising her daughters in the shadow of loss. She moved away from Lullwater Drive, unable to bear the memories that lingered in the house where Ron died. Tina Trexler retained custody of her daughter, but the relationship with her mother, Anne, was fractured beyond repair, and spent her days in a Florida prison, her once cozy life replaced by the stark reality of incarceration. Perez, unrepentant, faded into the anonymity of the prison system. Story 7. The summer evening of July 26, 2014, draped Sasebo, a quiet port city in Nagasaki Prefecture, Japan, in a soft, humid haze. The streets were calm, the air thick with the scent of the sea, and the cicadas hummed their relentless chorus. In a modest apartment building on the city's edge, 15-year-old Iwa Matsuo walked with a lightness in her step, her school bag slung over one shoulder. She was a bright, kind-hearted girl, known at Sasebo High School for her gentle smile and quiet determination. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and her uniform was crisp despite the day's heat. She had told her parents she was visiting a classmate, a girl she considered a friend, to work on a school project. It was a routine visit, one that should have ended with Iwa returning home to her family's small house, where her mother was preparing dinner and her father was unwinding after a long day at the shipyard. But Iwa never came home. Inside the apartment, the classmate, known only as Girla due to Japan's strict laws protecting the identities of juvenile offenders, greeted Iwa with a smile that masked something darker. The apartment was sparsely furnished, a reflection of the girl's solitary life. Her mother had died of cancer the previous year, and her father, overwhelmed by his daughter's increasingly erratic behavior, had moved her into this space when she started high school. The walls were bare, save for a few posters of anime characters, and the air carried a faint metallic tang, unnoticed by Iwa as she set her bag down and chatted about their project. Girl A, a slender 15-year-old with sharp features and an unsettling intensity in her eyes, seemed distracted, her responses clipped. Iwa, ever polite, didn't press. She didn't know about the tools hidden in the corner, a hammer, a saw, a knife, or the medical textbooks stacked on a shelf, their pages dog-eared at chapters on anatomy. The attack came without warning. As Iwa bent to retrieve a notebook from her bag, Girl grabbed a heavy metal tool, possibly a wrench, and brought it down with force on the back of Iwa's head. The blow was deafening in the small room, a sickening thud that echoed off the walls. Iwa staggered, her vision blurring, a cry escaping her lips as she tried to turn, to understand what was happening. But Girl A was relentless, striking again and again, her face a mask of cold determination. Iwa collapsed, blood pooling beneath her, her hands twitching as she fought to stay conscious. Girl A dropped the tool and reached for a rope, wrapping it tightly around Iwa's neck. She pulled with a strength born of something beyond rage, beyond reason, until Iwa's struggles ceased, her body limp on the floor. The apartment fell silent, save for the faint drip of blood onto the linoleum. Girl A stood over her classmate, her breath steady, her mind already moving to the next step. She dragged Iwa's body to her bed, arranging it carefully, as if staging a scene. Then, with a precision that chilled investigators later, she retrieved a knife and a saw from her collection of tools. What followed was an act so gruesome it would shock a nation. Girl A decapitated Iwa and severed her left hand, her movements methodical, almost clinical. She later told police, with a calmness that unnerved them, "I wanted to dissect someone." When she was done, she didn't flee. Instead, she sat at her computer, logged onto 2channel, a popular Japanese message board, and posted details of the crime, including photos, as if documenting an experiment. The posts were cryptic, chilling, and would later become a key piece of evidence. Iwa's parents, Hiroshi and Yuko Matsuo, grew worried when their daughter didn't return home by 9 p.m. She was a responsible girl, always calling if she'd be late. Hiroshi, a broad-shouldered man with a quiet demeanor, tried her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Yuko, her hands trembling as she stirred a pot of miso soup, urged him to check with Iwa's friend. When Hiroshi called the classmate's apartment, there was no answer. By 10 p.m., panic set in. They contacted the police, who dispatched officers to the apartment building. What the officers found when they entered Girl A's apartment would haunt them for years. Iwa's dismembered body on the bed, the air thick with the stench of blood, and Girl A sitting calmly at her desk, as if nothing had happened. The Sasebo police station was a hive of activity by midnight. Detective Kenji Sato, a seasoned officer with a reputation for dogged determination, stood in the apartment, his flashlight sweeping over the scene. The sight of Iwa's body, so brutally violated, made his stomach churn, but he forced himself to focus. The suspect, a girl barely old enough to drive, sat in handcuffs in the corner, her expression blank. She didn't even blink, Sato later told his partner, Detective Aiko Tanaka. It was like she was waiting for us. Girl A's confession came quickly, delivered in a monotone that sent shivers down Sato's spine. I did it all by myself, she said. I wanted to kill someone. I bought the tools myself. When pressed about her motive, she offered no clear reason, only a chilling curiosity about death and dissection. The detectives began piecing together the suspect's life. Girl A, whose name was withheld due to her age, was a complex figure, brilliant, troubled, and deeply isolated. She was a top student at Sasebo High School, excelling in academics and athletics, but her peers described her as distant, prone to sudden mood swings. Her mother's death in 2013 had shattered her world, leaving her unmoored. Her father, a 53-year-old businessman named Takashi, had remarried in January 2014, and the new family dynamic seemed to exacerbate her instability. Months before the murder, she had attacked Takashi with a metal baseball bat, an incident severe enough that he and his new wife moved her into her own apartment, hoping distance would stabilize her. Instead, it gave her the freedom to indulge darker impulses. Sato and Tanaka uncovered disturbing details. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises from the apartment, banging, sawing, late-night muttering, but no one had intervened. A search of the apartment revealed medical textbooks, their pages marked with notes on human anatomy, and a refrigerator containing the head of a cat, an apparent precursor to the crime. She was practicing, Tanaka said, her voice barely above a whisper as she closed the fridge door. The detectives also learned of a psychiatrist's warning, delivered to the Nagasaki Prefectural Child Consultation Center in June 2014. The doctor, after evaluating Girl A, had reported, "If she is left as she is, she could kill someone." The warning went unheeded, a bureaucratic failure that would later lead to the reprimand of 3 officials. For Sato, the oversight was a gut punch. "We could have stopped this," he said, his hands clenched into fists. The investigation moved swiftly. The 2-channel posts, traced to Girl A's IP address, provided a chilling timeline of her actions. She had lured Iwa to her apartment under the pretense of a school project, a plan prosecutors later argued was premeditated. The tools, purchased weeks earlier from a hardware store, suggested intent, as did her research into juvenile crime laws at the local library. She knew exactly what she was doing, Prosecutor Hiroshi Nakamura told his team, his voice heavy with the weight of the case. But the question of why remained elusive. Girl A offered no personal grudge against Iwa, no history of conflict. She was just there, she told police, her words a haunting echo of her detachment. Iwa Matsuo had been a light in her family's life. Born in 1999, she was the only child of Hiroshi and Yuko, a couple who had worked hard to give her a stable, loving home. Iwa was studious, with dreams of becoming a marine biologist, inspired by Sasebo's coastal beauty. She loved drawing, her sketchbooks filled with images of whales and coral reefs, and she had a quiet strength that endeared her to her classmates. At school, she was a mediator, often calming disputes with a gentle word or a smile. Her friendship with Girl A had been casual, built on shared classes and group projects, but Iwa had never sensed the darkness lurking beneath her friend's surface. She was so kind, Yuko later said, clutching a photo of Iwa at a school festival, her face radiant. She trusted everyone. The news of Iwa's death sent shockwaves through Sasebo. The city, with its population of 255,000, was no stranger to tragedy. 10 years earlier, in 2004, a 12-year-old girl named Satomi Matarai had been killed by a classmate in another shocking case known as the Sasebo slashing. But this new crime, dubbed the Sasebo High School girl murder case, was even more horrifying for its brutality and the suspect's apparent lack of remorse. The media descended on the city, with outlets like the Japan Times, The Guardian, and BBC reporting the grisly details. On X, posts expressed a mix of horror and disbelief, with users sharing Iwa's story and questioning how such a young girl could commit such an act. "This is beyond comprehension," one user wrote. "What happened to her to make her this way?" The community held a wake for Iowa on July 29, 2014, at a local temple. The air was heavy with incense and grief as classmates, teachers, and neighbors gathered to pay their respects. Hiroshi, his face etched with pain, spoke briefly, his voice breaking as he thanked those who had loved his daughter. Yuko, unable to speak, clung to a small urn containing Iowa's ashes, her body trembling with silent sobs. The school principal, a gray-haired man named Taro Yamada, addressed the crowd, his voice heavy with regret. "We have kept calling attention to the value of life," he said, "but the message has not been delivered." For many, the words felt hollow, a reminder of a system that had failed to protect both Iowa and her killer. The case took a tragic turn in October 2014, when Takashi, Girl A's father, was found dead in his home, having taken his own life by hanging. He had issued a public apology in July, his words filled with anguish. "My daughter's act can never be forgiven for any reason or cause. When I think of the shock and sorrow felt by the bereaved family, it breaks my heart." The media speculated that the weight of his daughter's crime, coupled with his own guilt for failing to intervene, had driven him to despair. His death added another layer of tragedy to a case already steeped in loss, leaving his new wife, Girl A's stepmother, to grapple with the aftermath alone. As the investigation progressed, the focus turned to Girl A's mental state. Psychiatric evaluations conducted in the fall of 2014 revealed she suffered from an autistic spectrum disorder, though prosecutors argued this did not absolve her of responsibility. She had shown signs of disturbance years earlier, including an incident in elementary school where she laced classmates' food with bleach. The evaluations painted a picture of a girl disconnected from empathy, her curiosity about death bordering on obsession. Yet, her intelligence and planning, evidenced by her library research and tool purchases, suggested a level of premeditation that chilled investigators. "She wasn't impulsive," Nakamura said. "She was methodical." The Nagasaki District Court faced a dilemma. Under Japan's juvenile law, offenders under 20 are typically treated leniently, with a focus on rehabilitation over punishment. But the brutality of the crime, coupled with public outrage, demanded justice. The court ordered a series of psychiatric tests to determine Girl A's criminal responsibility. The results confirmed she understood the consequences of her actions, but her mental condition complicated the case. On July 13, 2015, the court delivered its ruling. Girl A would be sent to a medical reformatory rather than a criminal court. The presiding judge, a stern woman named Keiko Mori, explained that prison would worsen her mental condition and hinder rehabilitation. "She lacks a sense of morality," Mori said, "but there is a chance for recovery." The decision sparked controversy. Some, including Iowa's parents, felt it was too lenient, a betrayal of their daughter's memory. Hiroshi, speaking to reporters outside the courthouse, his voice raw with grief, said, "She took my daughter's life, her future. How can this be justice?" Others, including mental health advocates, argued that the ruling was appropriate, given Girl A's age and psychological state. The debate played out in the media, with outlets like the Japan Times and Mainichi Shimbun analyzing the complexities of juvenile justice in Japan. On X, opinions were divided, with some users calling for harsher penalties and others urging compassion for a troubled teen. The aftermath of the case left Sasebo changed. The city, already scarred by the 2004 murder, grappled with its reputation as a place where young girls committed unthinkable acts. Schools implemented new counseling programs, and the Nagasaki prefectural government faced scrutiny for its failure to act on the psychiatrist's warning. 3 officials at the Child Consultation Center were reprimanded in 2015, a small acknowledgement of a systemic lapse that had cost Iowa her life. The media frenzy eventually faded, but the case lingered in Japan's collective memory, referenced in discussions about youth violence and mental health. For Iowa's family, the pain was unending. Hiroshi and Yuko moved to a smaller home, unable to bear the emptiness of the house where Iowa's laughter once filled the rooms. They kept her sketchbooks, her drawings of the sea a reminder of the dreams she would never fulfill. A memorial at Sasebo High School, a simple plaque with Iowa's name, became a place of quiet reflection for students and teachers. The Gus Giordano Dance School, though far from Sasebo, sent a condolence letter, their words a testament to Iowa's universal light, even if she had never danced on their stage. Girl A remained in the medical reformatory, her life a mystery to the public. Reports suggested she was receiving intensive therapy, but whether she would ever rejoin society was uncertain. Her actions had rippled outward, touching not just Iowa's family but her own, her school, and a nation struggling to understand how a child could become a killer. The case, known as the Sasebo High School girl murder, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of youth and the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness. In Sasebo, the summer evenings grew quiet again. The cicadas song a constant backdrop to a city healing from its wounds. But for those who knew Iowa, the silence was louder, a void where her voice should have been. Her story, and the tragedy that ended it, remained a haunting echo, a call to listen more closely, to act more swiftly, to save the next Iowa before it was too late. Story 8. The sun was high over Buford, Georgia, on August 11, 2022, casting a relentless heat across the sprawling apartment complexes that lined Buford Drive. Ashley Bocanegra, a 30-year-old mother with a radiant smile and a heart full of dreams, stepped out of her car, her phone buzzing with a text from a man she thought she knew. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her eyes, bright with the resilience of someone who'd fought for a better life, scanned the unfamiliar building. Ashley had moved to Georgia from New York City years earlier, seeking a fresh start for herself and her 7-year-old son, Liam. She was a woman who lit up rooms, her laughter infectious, her kindness a magnet for those around her. But that afternoon, as she walked toward an apartment in the 2900 block, she had no idea she was stepping into a trap. Inside the apartment, Antonetta Stevens, a 27-year-old woman with a sharp gaze and a simmering rage, waited with Janine Gonzalez, a 17-year-old whose teenage bravado masked a dangerous loyalty to her older brother, Juan. The two women had planned this moment meticulously, their anger fueled by a tangled web of jealousy and betrayal. Juan, who shared a son with Ashley, had been caught in a love triangle, balancing a relationship with Antonetta while maintaining a connection with Ashley. To Antonetta, Ashley was the other woman, a threat to her future. To Janine, she was an outsider who'd hurt her brother. The text that lured Ashley to the apartment came from Antonetta, posing as Juan, promising a conversation to clear the air. But there would be no talking. As Ashley knocked on the door, the air grew thick with the weight of what was to come. The attack was swift and brutal. Antonetta opened the door, her face a mask of false calm, and before Ashley could react, the two women descended on her. Fists flew, feet struck, and the apartment echoed with the sounds of violence. Janine, laughing with a chilling detachment, pulled out her phone, recording the assault as Ashley fought to defend herself. The video would later haunt those who saw it. Ashley, struggling to breathe, her body crumpling under the relentless blows. Her ribs cracked, her liver was damaged, and her face swelled with bruises. By the time the beating stopped, Ashley lay motionless on the floor, her phone stolen, her life slipping away. Juan, present in the apartment, watched in horror, his own body marked with scratches and bruises, though he later refused to explain how he'd been injured. He scooped Ashley into his arms, rushing her to his car, driving frantically to a nearby hospital. But it was too late. Ashley's injuries were catastrophic, and despite efforts to airlift her to a trauma center, she died before surgeons could intervene. The call came into the Gwinnett County Police Department at 1:07 p.m., a frantic report from the leasing office of the apartment complex. Sergeant Michael Harden, a seasoned officer with a knack for reading chaotic scenes, arrived to find a crowd of neighbors gathered outside, their faces pale with shock. A woman, they said, had been beaten in the courtyard, her screams drawing attention before she was carried away. Harden's team secured the area, cordoning off the apartment where the attack had taken place. Inside, they found signs of a struggle, scuffed floors, a toppled chair, and traces of blood on the carpet. Antonetta and Janine were still there, their demeanor shifting from defiance to unease as officers questioned them. Their story was flimsy. Ashley had shown up looking for Juan, they claimed, and a fight had broken out. But Hardin, his eyes narrowing, sensed the lie. The women's hands were bruised, their knuckles raw, and Janine's phone, seized as evidence, held the chilling video that would unravel their story. Ashley's sister, Jessica Roche, was at work when her phone rang. It was the hospital, and the voice on the other end was gentle but grave. "You need to come now," the nurse said. Jessica, a petite woman with Ashley's same dark eyes, drove to the hospital, her mind racing. She found Juan in the waiting room, his face ashen, his clothes stained with blood. "She's gone," he whispered, unable to meet her gaze. Jessica's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, her sobs echoing through the sterile hallway. Ashley, her vibrant sister who'd moved to Georgia for a better life, who danced with Liam to silly pop songs and dreamed of opening a bakery, was dead. "They fractured her ribs and her liver," Jessica later told reporters, her voice thick with grief. "She couldn't breathe. They took her from us." Detective Lisa Carver, assigned to the case, arrived at the hospital to interview Juan. He was evasive, his story muddled by fear and guilt. He admitted to being in the apartment during the attack, but claimed he'd tried to stop it. His injuries, scratches on his shoulders and back, suggested he'd been caught in the fray, but he wouldn't say more. Carver, a sharp-minded investigator with a no-nonsense approach, pressed him, but he clammed up, his loyalty to his sister and fiancé outweighing his willingness to cooperate. Back at the precinct, she reviewed the video from Janine's phone. The footage was sickening. Ashley's desperate gasps, Janine's mocking laughter, Antonetta's relentless fury. Carver's hands trembled as she paused the video, the image of Ashley's broken body frozen on the screen. "This wasn't a fight," she told her partner, Detective Ryan Voss. "This was an execution." The investigation moved quickly. Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez were arrested that evening, charged with aggravated battery, robbery, and felony murder. The Gwinnett County Police Department, headquartered in Lawrenceville, became a hive of activity as detectives pieced together the motive. Antonetta, they learned, was engaged to Juan, a man with a complicated past. He and Ashley had dated years earlier, producing Liam, their son, who was now left motherless. Antonetta had discovered Juan's continued contact with Ashley, sparking a jealousy that festered into rage. Janine, fiercely protective of her brother, had been drawn into the plot, her teenage impulsivity amplifying the violence. The women had lured Ashley to the apartment under the pretense of a meeting with Juan, a deception confirmed by text messages recovered from Ashley's stolen phone. "They planned it," Carver told the team, her voice steady but laced with disgust. "They wanted her dead." Ashley's life had been one of resilience and love. Born in the Bronx, New York, in 1992, she grew up in a close-knit family, the middle child of 3 siblings. Her mother, Maria, was a schoolteacher, her father, Carlos, a mechanic who instilled in Ashley a fierce work ethic. She was a dreamer, sketching recipes for cupcakes and cookies in a worn notebook, her laughter filling their cramped apartment. After high school, Ashley fell in love with Juan, a charming but troubled man whose life was marked by instability. Their relationship ended, but Liam's birth gave Ashley purpose. She moved to Georgia in 2018, seeking a quieter life for her son, working as a medical assistant and saving for her bakery. She was such a happy individual, her cousin, Brianna Jameson, told reporters. She lit up the room as soon as she walked in. The community of Buford, a growing suburb north of Atlanta, was shaken by the murder. Ashley had been a familiar face at Liam's school events, her warmth earning her friends among parents and teachers. Her death sparked an outpouring of grief, with neighbors leaving flowers outside her apartment and a GoFundMe raising $6,000 to bring her body back to New York for burial. "We hope for justice," wrote Ingrid Feliciano, the fundraiser's organizer. "Please keep our family in your prayers." On X, posts reflected the public's horror. "How could they do this to a mother?" One user wrote, echoing the sentiment of a community grappling with senseless loss. The case went to trial in Gwinnett County Superior Court in July 2023, Judge Angela Duncan presiding. The courtroom, a modern space with high ceilings and rows of wooden benches, was packed with Ashley's family, their faces a mix of sorrow and resolve. Jessica sat in the front row, clutching a photo of Ashley and Liam, her eyes fixed on Antonetta and Janine. The defendants, seated at separate tables, avoided each other's gaze. Antonetta, her dark hair pulled back tightly, wore a navy blazer, her expression unreadable. Janine, tried as an adult despite her age, looked younger in her oversized sweater, her eyes darting nervously. Prosecutor Sarah Klein, a veteran attorney with a reputation for fierce advocacy, opened the trial with a searing statement. Ashley Bocanegra was lured to her death, she told the jury, her voice steady. These women planned to kill her, and they laughed as she suffered. The prosecution's case was built on the video, a piece of evidence so raw it silenced the courtroom when played. Jurors winced as Ashley's cries filled the room, Janine's laughter a chilling counterpoint. Dr. Emily Chun, the medical examiner, testified about Ashley's injuries: 6 fractured ribs, a lacerated liver, and internal bleeding that overwhelmed her system. She died in agony, Chun said, her voice clinical but heavy with the weight of her findings. Text messages between Antonetta and Janine, recovered from their phones, revealed their planning. She needs to go, Antonetta had written days before the attack. I'm done sharing him. Klein argued that the motive was jealousy, pure and simple, a love triangle turned deadly. The defense teams, led by attorneys Michael Reese for Antonetta and Laura Hensley for Janine, painted a different picture. Reese argued that Antonetta acted in a moment of passion, provoked by Juan's infidelity. She didn't plan to kill, he told the jury, his tone measured. This was a fight that got out of hand. Hensley leaned on Janine's youth, claiming she was manipulated by her older accomplice. She's a teenager, caught up in her brother's drama, Hensley said. She didn't understand the consequences. But the jury, a diverse group of Gwinnett County residents, struggled to reconcile these defenses with the brutality of the video. Jessica, testifying as a character witness, spoke of Ashley's love for Liam, her dreams, her light. They took everything from us, she said, her voice breaking. My sister deserved to live. On August 3, 2023, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Antonetta Stevens was found guilty of felony murder, aggravated battery, and robbery, her face impassive as the foreman read the decision. Janine Gonzalez was convicted of the same charges, her shoulders shaking as she realized the weight of her future. Judge Duncan sentenced both women to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years for Antonetta and 25 years for Janine, citing her age as a mitigating factor. Your actions were callous and cruel, Duncan said, her voice firm. You robbed a child of his mother, a family of their daughter, a community of its light. Ashley's family wept, holding each other tightly, their relief tempered by grief. The aftermath of the trial left Buford quieter, its residents grappling with the fragility of life. Jessica took custody of Liam, moving him to New York to be near family. She kept Ashley's notebook, its pages filled with recipes and doodles, as a reminder of her sister's dreams. The apartment complex on Buford Drive installed new security cameras, a belated response to a tragedy that exposed its vulnerabilities. The Gwinnett County Police Department, praised for its swift action, used the case to train officers on handling domestic violence escalations, emphasizing the danger of jealousy-fueled conflicts. Antonetta and Janine, now 30 and 20, remain at Arundel State Prison, their lives defined by the consequences of a single afternoon. Juan, never charged, disappeared from Buford, his whereabouts unknown to Ashley's family. The case drew attention from outlets like The Independent and 11 Alive, which highlighted the brutality of the attack and the community's loss. On X, users debated the sentence, some calling it justice, others arguing it could never replace Ashley's life. She was beautiful inside and out, Brianna Jameson wrote in a post, her words a testament to a woman who'd touched so many. Ashley's memory endures in the small things, Liam's drawings, so like his mother's, and the annual vigil held by her friends in Beaufort, where they light candles and share stories of her laughter. The case of Ashley Bocanegra became a stark reminder of the destructive power of envy, the fragility of trust, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. In Beaufort, the summer heat still rises, the cicadas still hum, but for those who knew Ashley, her absence is a wound that time cannot fully heal.